Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait one moment for everyone to come in through the waiting room. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another webinar during this week-long International Parent and Family Orientation. As noted on the screen, this session is being recorded, and later during our time together, I will provide information on how to access the recording. Next slide. Just some housekeeping stuff. At the bottom of your screen, there's a question and answer feature. Please use that to ask us questions during our time together. We have a team of people who are ready to answer your questions. We also ask that you don't share any personal information about yourself or about your student, to keep your questions pretty general. And we will be able to answer them as we move along with the PowerPoint slide. We're also going to pause for a Q&A moment during this time together, so we can also take some of your questions and maybe make some of those questions live so that everyone can hear what probably most people are thinking at this time. Next slide. Another point I would like to say before I move along, we do have a translator who speaks Portuguese. So if you speak Portuguese and you would like to pose your question in Portuguese, we'll have someone to answer that for you as well. Okay, so my name is Karina Vio. I am the Senior Officer for the Office of Parent and Family Programs at UC San Diego. I am by wonderful faculty, members of UC San Diego and Trisha from the Academic Integrity Office, who are coming together today to talk about teaching opportunities at UC San Diego, the format of teaching, connecting with students from an academic perspective, supporting students' academic goals, research opportunities, and other related topics connected to teaching and academics at UC San Diego. Next slide. So more specifically, we're joined by Trisha Gallant, Director of Academic Integrity in the office. She will serve as your moderator today. Luz Chung, who's Lecturer and Supervisor for Secondary World Languages in the Education Studies Department. Wiwi Key, Assistant Teaching Professor for Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. Gerald, Assistant Teaching Professor, Computer Science and Engineering as well. So we will move to the next slide, and I'll pass it along to Trisha to talk about the purpose of today's session.
Thanks, Karina. So welcome everybody. I'm thrilled to see so many people in the participant list. Today we're going to focus on the transition to online learning. In particular, I'm going to ask the faculty, what are some of the strategies they've adopted for online education? How have they been innovated in their teaching practice and in connecting with international students and helping international students connect with their education and their learning, including how we maybe create some community online and how we support students' learning success. So we are going to move to showing you the panel. Wonderful. All right. So Luz, Gerald, and Hui Hui, thanks for joining us today. we have a lot of questions to go through in about just under 30 minutes. So I will direct a question at one of you, but then if one of you wants to jump in and add to that answer, then feel free and I'll try and rotate it around so that we all get to hear from all of you, but maybe not on each question since we're limited on time. All right. So my first question really pertains to both a remote environment, but also for the in-person environment, because hopefully we'll be back in person, before too long. So how do you work with, teach, and support international students? And Liz, I'm going to turn that over to you first.
Thank you, Trisha. It's good to see everyone, and welcome to UCSD. I appreciate the question because it makes me reflect on my own experiences. I draw from my experiences as a former international student, even though I will always consider myself to be an international student from South America, from Ecuador. If anybody's there from Ecuador, please raise your hand or something. But one of the things that I try to tell my students is to find spaces of support on campus, and we do have plenty of them. We have, of course, the International Center, but we also have the Cross-Cultural Center, for example, and different spaces on campus that can really support you. But I also want to encourage students to think about going outside of the UC San Diego campus bubble whenever we're able to go outside. To think about getting to know their community, the community where we live. San Diego is a very diverse community, and oftentimes as international students, I think it's not that we're afraid, but we feel very comfortable in this bubble. So I really encourage my students to get outside and learn about the community and find opportunities to be involved on campus. There are many opportunities, and I'm pretty sure that you've learned about them throughout the day today. And also to really ask questions. My field is K through 12 education. So I often have students who ask me about K through 12 schools in this country and trying to make sense of how they work here compared to how they work in their home countries. Is that what you,
yeah.
Is that okay, Trisha?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Actually, you reminded me that we didn't say this up front, but I knew Liz was a international student. I was also an international student. I'm from Canada, so is Karina. And I did my PhD here in San Diego at University of San Diego. Gerald, were you also an international student?
Yes, I'm also an international student. I'm from India, and I came here for my graduate school. I did it at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and yeah, so and also my research actually revolves around international students. I focus on what are the barriers that non-native English speakers face while learning computer science, and what are the interventions that we could do to actually help them learn better.
That's awesome. Gerald is one of many of our teaching professors that we have on campus, and they do a lot of interesting research. All their research is focused on pedagogy and classrooms and learning. So that's really exciting compared to some of our other professors who will study their discipline, like computer science, right? Or mechanical and aerospace engineering, whereas the teaching professors tend to study pedagogy. Wei Wei, were you also an international student in the US?
Yes. So I grew up in China and finished my bachelor degree, then come to the States for my graduate study. Yeah.
And where did you go for your graduate study?
I went to Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey, for my PhD degree.
Great. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And I thanks for sharing that. And I want to go back to Gerald actually, because he mentioned that he does research on students in his classroom. And so you're studying students, quote unquote, but do you also engage students in the research projects with you, and how do you do that?
Yes, I engage students in my research projects. So currently in the past year, I was working with nearly 10 undergraduate students who are working on like 5 different projects as 2 students in a group. And I work with them primarily based on their interests. So based on my research interests, these students came forward to me, and then they expressed interests in working in research. And then I created this research group, and the way that I work with them is more like I help them understand how to do research, because these are students in their first or second year
Yeah.
of undergraduate. And so I help them how to do research, how to learn about new things and new skills like programming and data analysis and stuff like that. And like during the past summer, like 3 of those groups were able to actually, we were able to, based on the work that we did in the last year, the students, undergraduate students actually wrote up research papers, and we submitted it to a computing education conference.
Nice.
And the work primarily focused on, like we took a survey in the computer science department throughout the year, and we tried to analyze the differences between what native English speakers, what are the experiences of native English speakers, and how did it compare with non-native English speakers. And it was pretty interesting to see that non-native English speakers are actually facing issues with expectations. They are actually, international students are expecting like a lot with their studies. And at the same time, they're also, because of that, they're spending much more time, which is great. And we also found that international students were performing better than native students in computer science courses.
Oh, that's so fascinating. That's awesome. Wei and Luz, just for a show of hands, do you also include undergrads in research projects? Luz doesn't. Wei, you do as well?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, as a teaching professor, one of my biggest research interests is also engineering education, pedagogical researches. I have engaged my graduate students, my teaching assistants, as well as undergraduate students who actually took my courses in my projects.
oh, that's great.
Thanks. I've been here only for 1 year in UCSB after 5 years in another institution. But just after 1 year, I have actually recruited a few of my undergraduate students in my educational project. Like one of them is in the summer, we worked on hardware kits that can be used for online hands-on classes. And all of the students who are the best students for my class, and helped, to formulate new materials for the next year. Yeah.
That's great. And I know, I just have some insider knowledge, Wei, that you're also involved in a project this year about, because this ties into our next question, so this is why I'm saying it, that we're looking at the use of oral exams especially now given the remote instruction environment, as an alternative way of assessing student knowledge, and also to make sure our students can verbalize their knowledge, not just write it out on an exam, but can actually talk about what they know from a particular class. And I'm so excited to see the results of that research. I'm going to let Luz jump in. So that's one example of how we're transforming teaching and assessment to a remote environment. Luz, do you have some other examples of what you've done differently in the remote environment?
Yes. One of the things that I do want to keep is the interaction with the students and the building of community. So for me, it is really important to ensure that our students are safe and they're doing well in our classes. It's really, I think for me, it's a primary concern, especially given what's going on in our world. And one of the things that I realized when we went to online learning was that I wanted to learn all of these fancy tools. And I realized that that was not the solution because it didn't make for a cohesive classroom. Mm-hmm. So I decided to just focus on a couple of tools that I knew well, but that would also allow students to have access, because not everybody has the same access to technology that these technology tools try to sell you. So one of the things that I've done is I've kept a lot of the things that I do in my classes, which is, the interactions and the writing assignments, all of the different kinds of ways in which we form community. But I've also included other ways for students to express their understanding and their reflections. So we use something that is very popular in K through 12, which is called Flipgrid, where students get to videotape themselves, and then that goes on a website where other students can look at the recordings and also put stickers saying, I like it, you know, or respond to them. We also use, I tend to draw from the technology that is used in K through 12 because right now they're facing similar issues. And another tool that I use is called Padlet, which is a bulletin board where students can write their thoughts. And Karina's nodding her head. I think she's familiar with that. So, but one of the things that to me is more important than the technology is being able to build community. So I want to make sure that the academic rigor is still there. So I haven't watered down the curriculum. I want to make sure that meaningful content is still there, but I also want to be mindful of the fact that not all of my students will have the access that some of these, like I said, technology tools will require. So I want to make sure that I also give alternative ways for students to work and to be engaged with the work. But I also want to provide them with opportunities to check in with me. So I do, so it's beyond office hours, is building in your classes opportunities to interact with your students. Yeah. So most of my classes are synchronous, except for my large class that I'm teaching this fall, which is going to be a combination of both. And I can tell you I'm very new to online teaching, and it's been a struggle, and I have been kicked out of my own class at times when I've lost internet.
Right.
You know, but it's just magical when you see the students on the screen, and it almost makes me want to cry because I have missed them so much. And when you see them and they're just happy to see you, it's a different experience. So I'm hoping to continue to improve in that area.
Thanks, Luz. Yeah, Gerald, Luz mentioned a couple of tools, and we all can get overwhelmed with tools, right? Teachers and learners can both get overwhelmed with tools. Do you have like one example of an innovative practice you've used teaching remotely that you didn't use before to maintain rigor, but not maybe overwhelm students, as Luz was saying, with too many tools and different things?
Yeah, so one of the things that I used was I made the assessments to be more realistic to how things are done in the real world. So for example, in computer science, when we go out and work in industry or in a research lab, the way we work is like we get a problem, we have a problem and we want to solve it. And you are actually literally given access to all the resources in the world. Like you can use the internet, you can talk with people and then do anything. So we made assessments in a way that we told them, okay, the problems that we are going to give are more going to be open-ended. Yep. At the same time, we are going to give you access to all the resources. You can access Google, you can access your class notes, you can access the textbook, whatever you want. But all we want to see is like, we want to see you given access to all the possible resources, how would you be able to like come up with an answer for this particular question? And at the same time, we told them like, again, we would like you to work on this on your own, mainly because we want you to, we want to see like what you are coming up with. And that is like no one correct answer. There are so many ways in which you could answer the same question. And so that actually opened up some space for students to explore. And we also made sure that we told them the reasons why we are doing so. So one of the reasons is I always had this, even before COVID-19, I was trying to have these types of assignments, but it was in class where students had access to all the like internet and stuff. Right. But now trying to do it in an online setting. At the end of the course, students also appreciated that like these types of exams were more practical than having a paper-based exam, which is like.
Yeah. Wait. What? I mean, what Gerald told me, I'm thinking, that's awesome. Like that works great for your discipline. Does that also work for your discipline? Have you been able to do something innovative like that to really help students stay engaged in the learning and the assessments?
Absolutely. So similar to Luz and Jared, so from very beginning, we realized the number one concern for students being a remote setting set probably is the loss of the connection, connection to their professor, to the university environment. So I had that fear when we began remote teaching. So I've been, actively formulating strategies how to overcome that. And surprisingly, I find I have discovered some tools that could be used and have an advantage. Even, I would like to see this happen in-person classes. So I approach how to continue that sense of community through building connections of students with the professor myself,
Mhm.
with their peers, as well as to the class materials. So
Mhm.
for example, I greet the students by their name when I sign in to the Zoom meeting. And that was take longer time when I was in person because
Right.
their
They
name.
didn't have their name beside their face.
Yeah, exactly. And for in-class engagement lectures, when I used to call my students, say, hey, who can actually draw this on the whiteboard? It might be more difficult. Now I just invite them to, annotate on my screen. And then actually very engaging to the class. To build connection with their peers, before I naturally take it as very natural, like they sit with each other. So they talk with each other, they will make friends. So I realized they can not do this anymore. So I actually create a discussion board. Say, tell me more about yourself. I made this a bonus, like a small bonus activity. Result was overwhelmingly good. Almost, I think 90% of the students posted stories, what's going on with their life, their pets, what are they exercising,
Right.
hints to get keep a good life balance. And they start to talk with each other. Hey, you are doing this. Can I get involved? Things like that.
That's great.
Connection with materials. I also find an advantage. Before I have to prepare, I teach engineering. I use a lot of prompts to demonstrate like a physical concept. Before I have always to say, oh, I'm going to bring this to the classroom. Now I felt like, oh, this is a pin connection. It's just like right from my desk. And one class was like right before my dinner, I actually cut a tofu to demonstrate a concept of pork. And students felt like, oh,
That's great.
engaging. So that's a few things I find was actually giving me some advantages.
Yeah, those are great examples, Weiwei. Thanks for sharing them. Liz, Weiwei made me think of a few things that connected back to your answer to the first question about finding spaces, getting to the San Diego community, not just the current one, or not just UCSD, which is harder to do now, and ask a lot of questions. And then Weiwei gave us some specific examples of what she's done in class to help the students connect. And Gerald mentioned about the harder times or the easier times or the differences between students learning in a language that's not their native, not their first language. Do you see international students struggle with something in particular that our domestic students don't? Because right now, or in the spring quarter, we were all struggling with remote instruction. It didn't matter whether you're international or domestic. We were all remote, right? But do you see either in person or even during remote instruction a difference between the international students and the domestic students? And if yes, any advice you have for the international parents to encourage them to help their students?
Yeah, you know what? That's a question that I often grapple with because, again, I draw on my own experience, and I don't want to be, and I want to really be understanding of my students' experiences. And in my work, for example, we do a lot of service learning, which has been very challenging because we are no longer allowed to go into K through 12 schools to serve as mentors and tutors or to conduct our own research with our own students or helping us with that research. So what was really interesting is that in the spring quarter, when we jumped to online learning, a lot of my students who wanted to do service learning were wondering how we were going to do that. And what I found is that we had to, of course, get the permission of the schools to be able to work with them remotely. There are a lot of legal issues and liability issues with tutoring young kids, as you know, in a remote environment. And what I found is that I remember I had a couple of international students in that class. They became very curious about the school system in this country. And that's why they took the course. Right. And even though they were unable to go to the site, because really that's what exposes them to the school system in this country, they were able to interact with teachers about what was going on. So they learned about, for example, inequalities in access to quality education because of what we're seeing in terms of disparities. And Gerald can probably speak to that, disparities to access to technology. And they began to learn a little bit more about the K-12 system. And they would tell me, you know what, we come from this country, and in this country we do things this way in K-12. And we often have this ideology. I had it coming from South America. I don't know if Karina and Trisha, you had it coming from Canada, but I had this notion that K-12 in education in the US was just completely bad, and just messed up, because this is what you hear and this is what you read.
Yeah.
And then when we started dialoguing with them, they said, this is not true. It's more about a systemic issue of inequality. And they began to grapple with that and to understand that. And then they began to think about their own countries. And they said, in our countries, we also have that.
Yeah.
But we never talk about those issues. So I think for them at the beginning, in all of the courses that I teach, my courses are very much about sociology. They struggle with that because they want to, they're saying, well, no, things are fine in this country, or things are fine in my country. So I think they struggle with that, trying to sort of get out of that comfort zone of understanding education through their own lens.
Yeah.
And it is not until they go out and they interact with schools or they interact with our readings that they gain a better understanding. And so I have a couple of students who are they work out with me a lot. One of them is a graduate student. He's an international student, and he's going into medical school. But yet because of the class, he's now connected with one of the teachers in San Diego to start a mentorship program.
That's great.
And another one of the students is my instructional assistant. And so she's able to really connect with international students in my classes to sort of help them make sense of the system. I don't think that answers your question.
Well, no, but it did.
Oh, sorry.
And, no, it did. And it made me think of something that I want to ask to wrap it up with, because we're getting close to wanting to go to questions and answers. So you're talking about helping the students understand K through 12, but really it's also our international students, and I experience this, is trying to understand education for myself in this new environment. Like, what's grading like, and what are professors like? And you said invite them to ask questions. Am I allowed to ask questions of my professor? Am I supposed to challenge what they say? So it's helping the international students adapt to their own new educational environment. And so I want to give Gerald and then Huihui an opportunity to address that if they want, or if there's something else you're buzzing about that you really want to address before we go to question and answers. You have the floor for that. So Gerald, you first.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that I see international students facing with the education system's culture in the US is there are so many things that are not in other countries. So even drawing from my own experiences, I did not even know what office hours meant. But people used to use the word office hours, professor's office hours so commonly.
Right.
And I was just thinking that probably those are the times that professor would be in the office. Almost I spent my first semester at UW-Madison thinking that, okay, professors would be at their office, but I did not know how to make use of these resources.
Right.
And later, one professor explicitly told me that office hours are times where professors dedicate especially for students, so that students can come and meet with them to ask questions, to have interactions, to learn more about their research and stuff. And that really helped me during my graduate school. And so what I do personally in all my classes is, and the first day of class, I explain so many terms like office hours, like Piazza, the online discussion forum, what these tools are, like, or what are these things, so that the cultural barrier is broken as much as possible. And then I try reminding them with emails and with different posts saying that, okay, these are the different resources that are available and stuff like that. Yeah, so this is one key thing that I try doing.
So critical that we don't assume students know, domestic or international, frankly, that students know what we mean when we say something like office hours. That's a really, really good example. Wait.
Yeah, this reminds me, I had an honor in my first quarter teaching in USCSD. One of my international students, invited me for have a lunch with my professor program.
Yes.
It was a really honor because I think students have like twice of opportunity each quarter. So she told me that when she's an international student, when she tell her high school friends, she is having lunch with her professor, her friends in other countries, like, oh, that I didn't know, that's crazy. So I realized that there could be like differences from country to country, how things work in university or how classes are administered or taught, just like small differences. I think the challenge like international students have is to process and get familiar with those like small differences where they can actually benefit and maximize the resources they have to succeed.
Yeah.
So as a professor, what I'm always aware is just like a practice I'm always, trying to do as part of my inclusive teaching for a diverse body of students. I always remind myself to keep the students aware, the resources they have. Something, it could be very small and real random, but it could actually give them a door that open to something that they will be really, really interested. I did encounter some of my students, like you are aware, I was working on this oral assessment implemented in remote teaching. And I actually pilot a session in the summer. In my survey, one of my international students used the word, he's really scared of oral assessment because of language concerns. And actually the first one didn't go well. And we actually came with a plan with the TAs. And he actually did really, really well later on. It's not, he doesn't know that, the concept is how to use terminologies. So if I want to give any suggestions to international students, that will be confident in yourself. If you don't know something, probably you are not alone, regardless international students or, domestic students. Just ask. And time a student asks me a question, I find out I made a mistake on my assessments.
Right.
Our professors want you to succeed. Just ask questions. There's no bad questions.
Yeah. That's a really good point, Wei Wei. And I would emphasize, ask people in the know. So I think international students assume domestic students know everything and know all the answers, and they do not. So parents that are listening, please encourage your student to ask their professors, ask their TAs, ask people who work in offices like myself, their questions. And I know that's scary because we're authority, we're authority figures, but you want to make sure you're getting the right information. And I would also point out that I think it's hard for international students to know what are good resources and bad resources. And I would say anything at UC San Diego is a good resource. If it's through the Writing Hub or, or the Commons or through your department, or use those resources. Don't spend money on resources outside of UC San Diego. You don't need to, it's unnecessary. And they don't know, you can't trust maybe the quality of what those services that you're getting from outside of the university.
Yeah, Tricia, just want to one sentence in here. Right? By saying let my students be aware of resources like, English as a second language center, like a Help on the Language or Writing Center. Just 1 year, I had a group of senior design project students, all of them are international. So the first round of the final report they gave me, I don't think that's publishable. So I actually introduced them to international writing, the writing center by teaching learning.
Yes, good.
Guess what? They actually gave me the best report of all groups.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to jump, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I was going to call you.
Well, okay. One of the things that I think we all struggle as emergent bilingual people, as English learners, is the writing part. When I came into this country, when I was told to write an essay, I had no clue what that meant. And the way we write in Spanish is very different than the way that we write in English. So I was writing these long essays with almost no periods, very much like in Spanish. So of course I, failed my writing classes and it was just horrible. But I was, I think like all of you have said, I was very afraid because I came from an education culture where you did not assume that the professor could ask you. And one of the things that I want to encourage all parents and people who are in the audience is that at UCSD you have professors who want to support you. We're here for you, so we're not here against you. So we will, like Gerald said, we will always offer opportunities in our classes to, like I always offer my students to send me drafts. We can talk about the readings if they're very difficult. And it's not because we want to catch you being bad, it's because we want to support you. And so it's not a trick offer, it's an actual offer. So please do take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. So we do have a question from the audience. So we talked a little bit, way about trying out some oral exams, and we mentioned the word assessments. And just for the audience, the word assessment is a general term to mean any activity that's done to test the student's knowledge at that particular point in time. So an assessment could be an essay that Luce was just talking about that students submit. It could be a written exam that's timed and proctored. It could be a project. It could be a group project. So assessment is just the broad umbrella term to refer to the activities we use to test if the students has the knowledge we hope they have at a particular point in time based on what we've been teaching them. So Wei mentioned that she's been trying to do some oral exams in the remote setting. And the question is, how else would exams be conducted in the remote setting? Gerald?
Yeah, so the way that I conducted exams in the past spring quarter was that there were like weekly exams. Students were given, we would release the exams on a Friday morning. And the exams, students would have 24 hours to take the exam, but the actual exam would only take them less than an hour.
Right.
And the reason for having 24 hours is just to make sure that students were into different time zones. They were in India, they were in China, and so many different places in the world. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone has the equal chance to take an exam at a time that they are most active, kind of. So we gave them the 24-hour duration, and the exams was, the type of exams that we gave were multiple choice questions.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the questions were like multiple choice questions, and these were auto graded. And there was other part of the exam where students had to like type in free responses, and these were graded by the teaching assistants and tutors.
Right, great. So kind of a traditional style exam, just done in Canvas, I'm assuming, which is our management software. Your students will get very, very familiar with Canvas. That is one tool that they will see from class to class. But a pretty traditional format, just extending the availability for students in different time zones. Great, thanks. Another question from the audience are, what are some opportunities to do research in an online setting? Well, we had Gerald talk about he has students engaged, and I'm assuming that continued, Gerald, in the remote environment. You still conducted your meetings with your research group in a remote environment. But do we have an example of research where none of you are doing research like in a lab setting, right? So do you have any sense from your colleagues about how research is being done that would normally be in a lab? Wei?
Yeah, so we UCSD has started the Orange Ramp return, to campus with 25% capacity. I know some of my colleagues, I personally, for my fundamental research, I don't do a lot of experiment either. It's simulation based. Some of my colleagues actually have their, research students, occasionally go back to their labs and continue their work in there. So it all depends on who's the professor and what kind of work they are doing. I actually engaged one student in my research, but it's all simulation. So it's even in remote, setting, it will be based on computer anyway. So students could actually approach to a professor whose research they are interested in, then ask the professor. It will be case by case.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And hopefully Again, this is a short term, I mean, it's longer, I think, than any of us had wished for. But if for your students who are just entering first year, you've got plenty of time, you know, after this year to get involved in research. And I think it's rare, I could be wrong, but it's rare that first year students get too involved in research projects. So hopefully there'll be some time to do those even in person. Luce, I have another question from the audience. The question is, will students get feedback on their progress from time to time? And I know obviously they get feedback from individual professors and individual classes throughout the quarter, but can you talk a bit more about how students should and could keep track of their academic progress, not just in one class, but in all of their classes?
Wow, that's a good question. So you're always giving me the tough questions. I'm just kidding. So, you know, one of the things that, well, I can tell you about particularly what we do in education studies is I have my students, so my students do quick writes every time we meet. And I always read them and I respond to their quick writes. And that's how I know.
You might have to explain what a quick write.
Oh, I'm sorry. So a quick write is, so I tell the students you have 5 minutes to respond to this prompt, to this question.
Okay.
And so
it could be, can you give one example of what a question would be?
Yeah, so for example, I will say, you know, in one of the readings, this term was used, or in one of the readings that we're going to be doing, this term will be used. What do you think it means? You know, okay. you can guess. It doesn't have to be the actual answer. So then I read those and then I see where my students are. So it's sort of like to tap into their prior knowledge, to their understanding of the concepts. And that helps me build my teaching. Mm-hmm. But it's also about being, so I tell my students, all of them, international, non-international, keep up with the readings in my classes in particular. Do not go to class. Don't just rely, I don't podcast, but right. Don't rely on podcasts. Don't rely on your friends taking notes for you. Be on time, be engaged, and do not fall behind, because that will allow you to understand. If your professor gives you feedback on an assignment, you'll understand why. Because there is actually a connection to what happened in the class, or there's a connection to maybe something that your professor responded. Sometimes when I give feedback to my students, they don't know what to do with it. And I think I need to be more specific about that, because I tell them, hey, did you see my feedback? And they're like, yes, and they don't know what to do. And now what? So I think that's the part that I need to work on, is especially on an online environment, is what do you do with that feedback and how do you use that feedback for future learning? But it's really important that you stay on top of the work and answer your emails, read the emails that are sent to you, all the messages that we send on Canvas. I think it's really important.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. We have to wrap up, so I'm going to take a moment of moderator privilege and emphasize something that Liz just said. All students need to keep an eye on their own progress, right? So they get feedback from every class, whether it's from TAs or faculty. They're getting grades all the time on these different assessments. And so they have a sense of how they're doing. They also have a syllabus up front that tells them all of the things they're gonna have to do that quarter for each class. And it's important that they not delay those things, right? So I know, for example, in computer science, where Gerald is from, students they underestimate how long each assignment's going to take them, and they tend to start at the last minute, and that leads to all sorts of problems. So really, it's upfront when your student gets all of their syllabi for all their classes, plotting that out, planning their quarter schedule basically of when I'm going to study for what class. What do I know about this? Am I going to have to study more for this class and that class? And then paying attention to the feedback they're getting that Luz spoke about, and asking questions if they don't know what to do with that feedback and how to continue to make progress. And with that, I'm going to thank the panel and turn it back over to Karina.
Actually, can I turn it right back to you? Would you mind talking through these
Sure.
resources, and then I'll take over.
Absolutely. So resources and tools, obviously I made a plug for getting our website up there. It's extremely important for, especially in this remote environment, for your students to understand what integrity expectations are at UC San Diego. What does that mean? They're going to be taking an online integrity tutorial, so they'll learn more about it then. Keep Learning Remotely is an awesome site where students can learn review some of these strategies, or you as parents can review some of these strategies for how to learn in the remote environment. And then we specifically added the strategies and tools to avoid plagiarism. It's 3 modules the library offers online. And if your student wants to learn more about how do I write, Luce was talking about learning how to write in English in American University was very different from how she learned to write in Spanish. And so learning the strategies and tools to write with honestly and with integrity according to our expectations, those are really good modules your student could take.
Thank you, everyone. We've gone through the Q&A. Here are some instructions on how you can listen to the recorded webinar in your preferred language once you land on YouTube. The arrow indicated on the screen is the settings, and all you have to do is follow the few simple steps to turn your closed caption into your preferred language. We have more webinars coming this week. Please look out for them. We'll be sending some email notifications today and tomorrow just to remind you about what we have left for this week for this program. And then I would love to see you during Homecoming at Home, October 19th through the 25th. Learn more about the program by logging into parents.ucsd.edu. Registration at homecoming.ucsd.edu. It's a program for the entire UC San Diego community, but we also have very specific sessions for parents of UC San Diego students. So we hope you can join us here. I want to thank the panel and everyone who supported this webinar. We hope to see you in the coming days and definitely for the next academic year. Have a great day, everyone.